This talk is called You Can't Always Get What You Want. Words by the great Jagger and Richards combination, and a huge amount of truth. We always want to get everything. We want growth, we want profitability, we want sustainability, we want to be loved, we want to retire and not have to do anything ever again, we want to fall in love and people fall in love with us, all that, but you can't always get it. So the inspiration this morning may well be followed by a little expiration. So my apologies if it's too downbeat. But I want also to refer to one thing that Peter this morning said. He writes books, and he's an author. And he was implying, very politely I thought, that his publisher isn't always doing the best job for him. And he said, why? It takes forever for the book to come out. Once it's out, it takes forever to get into the hands of the readers or the buyers. And they don't add much value. They don't seem to want to make the book a better thing. He's right. We are all guilty. We are all guilty as publishers. We don't do the best job we can for our principal customer, which is the author. There is a sort of in the room an assumption that somehow the publisher's customer is the reader. And of course, to some extent, that's true. But the best publishers are the ones that build the best list, the best stable of authors. Good authors sell, not so good, don't. However good your marketing is, you can push water uphill only so far. So, to turn now to publishing today, there's a real paradox. 2 years ago, or 3 years ago nearly, 2019, when COVID hit, I think I wrote a piece in Publishing Perspectives saying it is absolutely obvious that we're in for a really tough period. I could not have been more wrong. Despite bookshops being closed for a long period, nearly every publisher, both general trade book publishers, children's book publishers, academic book publishers, have had record years. They've had record sales, but perhaps more importantly, they have made record margins. I speak as a shareholder in Bloomsbury Publishing plc, and I can tell you the dividend payments, the share price, absolutely fantastic after effectively 2 years with very limited bookshop support. Well, what does that tell us? So, what have we seen? Why? Well, certainly people were reading more. We know that they're buying more, and we think they're reading more. We don't actually know if they're reading more, but they're certainly buying more. And a lot of people buying particularly children's books to help children's education because you learn through reading. Academic journals, scholarly journals, remained hyper-profitable in spite of open access pressures and other pressures from library budgets, things like that. Higher education, well, it struggled a bit, but the transformation to digital delivery for university students is happening, and happening big time. And I should say, wearing my Bloomsbury hat, their investment in digital transformation of their more specialized books has been a huge driver of profit and, frankly, sustainability. The other thing that happened was that however stupid the governments who run us are, and speaking as someone from the United Kingdom, we could not have a worse government than we have now. However stupid they are, they've all cottoned on to the fact that intellectual property is a bedrock of their country. Education drives gross domestic product. Research drives gross domestic product. And I think most importantly, literacy drives GDP. So even they've got the hang of it, which is really quite a major step forward. I can't speak for the rest. Well, while all this good news was happening, and it really was good news, we got some headwinds. And those headwinds aren't going to go away. Library budgets are under extreme pressure, both in the university sector and in the public sector. The COVID, I call it the COVID dividend of the extra learning, reading, is diminishing. Slightly, I hope. We all know the logistical issues that have hit various bits of our supply chain. Energy increases and thus paper price increases, huge. But even outside that, significant cost inflation and significant costs of what I would call non-publishing overheads. One thinks of publishing overheads as being editorial, sales, marketing, production, finance. But now there's a whole other thing. HR departments are expanding inexorably. Legal departments are expanding left, right, and center. It's a real added burden on the industry. So my next slide, I headed SNAFU, which is a term not many of you will know, an acronym. It comes from the Second World War and from the British Army. When a general was asked to report on how the war was going, he would say SNAFU. And I think we could say that about publishing today. 10% of the books we print never leave our warehouses. 20 to 30% do leave the warehouses and then come back again. Transportation costs are going through the roof. We now, I speak again as a British person, we now have tariff wars. A colleague of mine from Spain, I've been trying to send him some books, and he's arrested almost every time I send him a book, and he gets a bill for 2,000 euros or something like that. It's unbelievable. The other thing that's happening, which is a headwind, and not everywhere, but certainly in scholarly publishing, is the idea that the reader paying to read something is somehow less moral than the author paying to be published, which is the underlying thesis of open access. Well, whether it's right or wrong in any particular sector, it certainly changes people's attitudes to value. And then, I think no one's mentioned the word today. Last night they did. It begins with an A and ends in an N. We have a huge consolidation, monopolization, you might say, of distribution channels through one internet service provider, who are our best friends most of the time and sometimes our worst enemies. And finally, on the list of SNAFU, every single process is too complex and thus too slow. Just at the very crude level of the supply chain, a book is handled, I estimate, 24 times between manufacture and purchase. And then if it's not purchased, it is handled 24 times coming back. Now, a paperback book with a value of 15 euros, shall we say, handled 24 times, or indeed 48 times. This makes no sense. These things have been with us for a while. The sustainability argument is now becoming more and more urgent, as we've heard, and we've got to get down to doing something about it. I'm keeping an eye on the time. Why? Why do we create so much stock? Well, there's a number of reasons. And one is an absurd reason, which is called gross profit. Publishers or companies set gross profit targets. Usually in the UK it's 55%. In order to get to a 55%, you print more copies because that reduces the cost. The fact that we're still doing it is unbelievable. Then the next one is we all have sales forces. Now, we call them sales forces. They are people who go around bookshops saying, would you like to borrow some books? You can, and I've always thought that must be one of the easiest jobs in the world. They haven't sold anything for the last 20 years. But they do have what's called a sales budget. And they better fulfill it or they won't get their bonus. So how do you fulfill it? You oversell. The bookshop says, I only want 10 copies. You say, oh, come on, give us a break. Take 20. By the time they come back, everyone's forgotten and the bonus has been paid. And then, I can't remember exactly when this happened in Britain, but I think probably about 15 or 20 years ago, we all got very interested in distribution logistics. How efficient is our warehouse? And how efficient is our customer service? We discovered that we spent a lot of time arguing with retailers about the copies they wanted to return. And someone had this brilliant idea that if we didn't argue with them and just took the returns, because we usually lose the argument anyway, that would be fine. So we said, okay, fine. Everyone can return anything they want, and we'll give them credit. Well, that doesn't help sustainability. For the retailer's point of view, there's no disincentive not to do what your sales colleague or your lending colleague wants you to do, because you can always send them back. It's dead easy. So they overbuy. We oversell, they overbuy. And what happens? Pulping, write-downs, waste. So how do we change? We heard about how difficult it is to change people's habits. And what I've described, frankly, are habits. We just haven't done it. So how can we change it? Well, clearly, our behavior. I studied psychology at university in the days when we studied it. It was science, not sociology. And there was a guy called Skinner, who was an American psychologist, who did the research on rats and pigeons and showed if you rewarded them, they would do what you wanted them to do, or if you penalized them in some cases, they would. So behavior reflects targeting. We have to change our targets. So first of all, I would abolish the gross profit as any sort of target in any sort of business. We need to look much more closely and target our overheads, because in many cases, there's simply a splodge of overhead thrown at a profit center, which really doesn't say how much trouble that book or product really was, how many times it was handled. We should change the return system, and incidentally, we could do this. And no one ever has succeeded, but it doesn't mean. I was very taken by the whole Adidas attitude to this. Just because something's difficult doesn't mean you don't do it. And we could do it quite simply in the first place by saying the default for a retailer is that it is a firm sale. And if you want to make it different, you've got a great big book that you want to sell in and you want to pile it up, fine, you can make that the exception. But right now, they send back 2 copies of this, 1 copy of that, 3 copies of that, all of which have to be processed nonetheless, and it's a total waste of human and actual thing. So I would then change the way we cost books to be purely cash-driven. How much is it costing? How much are you going to get back in the first year? That's it. If it doesn't pass that, then you shouldn't do it, or you have to change the price, or you do something else. And finally, the thing that could really change this is that speed to market, back to Peter's thing, 6 months to 12 months or more, speed to market is essential. There's no way that sort of time scale makes any sense to anyone. And incidentally, the reason it takes that long is back to the retailers who say, Barnes & Noble in the United States say, we won't stock a book unless you get at least 12 months notice. For God's sake. So it's not the production system itself, it's actually the built-in atherosclerosis, I would say, of the business. The way round it is quite clear. Rather than dispatching print copies, holding them in warehouses, we should send electrons. We should always, at least, I can speak as an English language publisher, but I think nearly everyone now has to think globally, but print locally wherever possible. It's a mindset. And the fact that you get a slightly lousier margin because you're not getting the print numbers is sort of irrelevant if you deal in cash, which is what. And we need printers, I would say particularly print-on-demand printers, to work with us to make that possible. Well, what would be the impact if we could do it? Well, I did some rough calculations. Incidentally, if you go to McKinsey, they will charge you $150,000 or $200,000 for this information that I'm going to share with you. And I'm not sure that they'd be any more accurate. This took me all of 5 seconds. Returns rates would be halved. Our carbon footprint would be significantly reduced. I suspect you'd get 30% down. We would sell more books because we will publish the books when they should be published, not when Barnes & Noble internal systems dictate. It would improve the net profit margin. And finally, and I think most importantly, and Peter and I fundamentally disagree on this, I think there's a misconception about what publishers do, who they are serving. Is it the reader? Is it the retailer? In the same way that Canon also has to say, who are we serving? And I absolutely think we have to serve our authors. Our authors are our brands. Thank you. Publishers' brands there are some good brands, but they're very, very few and far between compared with the vast number of books that are published. And indeed, authors move from publisher to publisher, therefore the brand goes with them. So the publisher's brand is not, it's not like Adidas, put it that way. There's some small ones which are, but overall there aren't. So the real thing about sustainability now is, and it's a real challenge for us, is to get our authors on side. So when I tell J.K. Rowling that she's not going to be in Barnes & Noble because we don't accept their returns policies or whatever it might be. That's a bit of a thing. But we have to keep going at it, and we have to bring the author community with us. If we don't do that, I think all this stuff I've said will be minimal. But if we do, and we can bring the authors with us, we will get growth, and it will be profitable, and it will be sustainable. So back to the great Jagger and Richards. Of course, you can't always get what you want, but if you try, sometimes you just might find you get what you need. Thank you all very much.